Gears of War very obviously has some real life inspiration when it comes to its design choices, and this is heavily encompassed by its weaponry, which can be felt right up until Gears 5, even with different approaches to how weapons are designed in the new saga. But when looking at the evidence, you can tell Cliff Bleszinski was very much inspired by the weapons, tactics and politics of the Vietnam War. This, in my opinion, is why Gears feels so different, and that is down to the weapon designs. Here's a little history lesson for you. The basic design philosophy of weapons and vehicles in Gears was that it had to be similar to the tech of the Vietnam War, so around the 60s and 70s if you're unaware. Now, this attitude makes sense when you compare the Pendulum Wars with the Cold War. The tech is very similar, and the Hammer of Dawn being the only thing that ended it. The closest real-life comparison would be nuclear weapons, but these help prevent an escalation to a ground war, hence the term Cold War. The Pendulum Wars were obviously inspired by the Cold War, with the COG being NATO including countries like the US, Britain, Germany and Australia, and the UIR being mainly the Soviet Union, its satellite states and occupied territories such as Vazgar being Afghanistan. Enough with the history, let's talk about those guns. When looking through the catalogue of weapons, nothing other than the hammer really defies that logic. The Vietnam War was dirty, it was savage, and it was brutal, with widespread use of chemical weapons, carpet bombings, and incendiary-based weapons. War was still very much up close and personal. Even though technically a modern war with the definition used to describe war in the 20th century, Gears 1 to 3 very much embody the spirit of the Vietnam War. The Lancer, or more specifically the Retro Lancer, mirrors the US's use of the M14, where the weapon was being outclassed by the Soviet AK-47. The M14 was uncontrollable when used as a fully automatic weapon, so a smaller caliber rifle that could be more easily controlled was required. Sound familiar? So, the Retro Lancer in the game was known for its high stopping power and bayonet. The bayonets could not penetrate locust hides and were prone to snapping after a single use. The solution was to come up with a new Lancer, and Adam Phoenix was inspired by Ty Kaliso killing a drone with a power saw and set to work making the Lancer Mark II. This is mirrored by the US's adoption of the M16. While not boasting a chainsaw bayonet, it featured a larger magazine with a smaller round and was easier to control at automatic fire. Just like the M16, it allowed the COG to carry more ammunition for when they were out on patrol. If that wasn't on the nose enough, the Hammerburst was known internally as the AK-47 of Gears. You can even see the similarities of its rugged design and banana-shaped magazine. The Hammerburst is designed to stand up to an unimaginable punishment in the hollows or on the surface and packs a punch just like the AK-47. Even comparing the Lancer Mark II and the Hammerburst in terms of stopping power is enough to cement the real-life versions as inspirations. When it comes to weapons development in the Gears universe, there are very few scientists that look for smarter ways of killing, rather than the tried and true methods. There was a lot of pushback against the M16's inception, as many high-ranking officers believed a larger round to be better than a smaller, more accurate one, despite many servicemen vouching for the M16's capabilities. It was found out that the US military officials were fixing tests between the M16 and M14 and was only discovered after an inquiry was launched, due to the conflicting evidence between the tests and in the field. These ideas are very much mirrored in the books for Gears of War, where many military officials believed the Pendulum Wars were to be won on the ground and did not believe in the usefulness of the Hammer of Dawn in ending the war. There have only been a handful of innovators in the Gears universe, and the two main examples are Adam Phoenix and Damon Baird. A prime example is a quote from Adam Phoenix as he talks about the non-pragmatic nature of military command and their attitude towards winning the Pendulum Wars. Infantry, armour, artillery were all about guns, bigger guns, ships to carry even bigger guns, and aviation to support those guns and the gears carrying them. We've never moved much beyond the model of primacy of land forces. We've grown comfortable with war. The time's coming when we'll need to work smarter, to develop aviation and maritime assets in their own right, and maybe even move into the turf the intelligence community guards so jealously. We've got to be more flexible to be ready for whatever the future might throw at us, because the next enemy might not think like us. The point is further emphasised when looking at the events of Gears of War Judgment and contrasting Baird's willingness to use the light mass missile on General Khan to save Halvo Bay. This ultimately leads to Kilo Squad's arrest by Colonel Loomis. Despite Baird's initiative, Loomis informed Sophia that she should leave strategy to men with bars. In defense of Loomis, it did not kill Khan but did destroy many locusts following the strike. Shortly thereafter, Halvo Bay did end up succumbing to the locust horde. Difference is, Colonel Loomis still insisted on the Onyx Guard being the best way to defend Halvo Bay when tactics needed needed to be changed to defeat the Locusts. A large-scale ground conflict was not effective against the Locust Horde, so weapons of mass destruction were used to better effect. The Hammer of Dawn, the Light Mass Bomb, and Jacinto were much more effective than the use of large amount of ground forces, with the emulsion countermeasure being the final weapon of mass destruction to end the Locust War. The Vietnam War saw a large innovation in the kind of weapons that were used, with chemical weapons, bombing runs, and napalm used to destroy the guerrilla fighters. While not quite as devastating as the Gears weapons, this would mark a change in warfare different from the First World War to the Korean War, where air superiority was very much the way to destroy your enemy. Also, in terms of political factions, the Locusts represent the Viet Cong or NVA, the COG the United States, so what about the Stranded? It is my belief that they represent the South Vietnamese citizens who were caught in the crossfire between the two warring sides. The American troops were tasked with improving relations between the South Vietnamese and the US. They had to show them that the Western way of life was very much better than the alternative to communism. The issue was, it's very hard to convince those civilians when you're destroying their homes with napalm and Agent Orange. This is very much mirrored in the hammer strikes in 2AE, where many Stranded lost family and their homes. How can they trust the COG to protect them when they actively choose to destroy everything they held dear? The American soldiers could not foster relations with the locals when their primary reason for being in Vietnam was to kill, and the COG very much embody this. Baird's attitude towards the Stranded is that of suspicion and distrust. However, a quote from Dom when discussing Operation Lifeboat with a Stranded very much embodies this. The COG isn't a soul-crushing machine, dumbass. It's society, mutual support, mutual dependence. Individuality might sound all noble and free, but it generally means crapping on your neighbours, and if you crap on your neighbours, don't expect them to help you. Rules hold humans together, and it's together or die. I think an untouched comparison between the Vietnam War and the Gears of War franchise is the similarity between tactics. While there isn't a one-for-one comparison throughout the war, where the NVA would very much struggle to beat the US in open conflict, the Locusts easily destroyed the COG. After the Hammer of Dawn strikes in 2AE, the playing field was sort of levelled, despite the COG population being reduced by 90%. The Locusts had to evolve their tactics to reduce the effects of the Hammer of Dawn strikes. This is when the Locusts chose to adopt guerrilla tactics to fight the COG. This is similar to the Viet Cong, where they could easily launch hit-and-run tactics to fight the US ground troops. They could not afford to fight them in extended firefights, as that would allow for close air support to dial in their position. A clear comparison is the use of cedars to ink the sky, which would prevent any sort of Hammer of Dawn support. This would also be mirrored by the Viet Cong's reliance on the jungle canopy to hide their movements. These hit-and-run tactics to avoid air support is seen in the original Gears of War game, where the Locusts could pop out at any time through an E-hole. This would allow them to quickly destroy the COG ground forces and avoid the Hammer of Dawn. The jungles of Vietnam were littered with a series of tunnels to allow the Viet Cong to move undetected by the US and allow them to hide and retake areas when the US had cleared them. This is extremely similar to the network of tunnels under the ground on Sierra. The US would realise that they could not win a territory war in Vietnam, so they would have to adopt new tactics. In the second phase of the Vietnam War, General Westmoreland suggested using search and destroy tactics, where small squads of GIs would be dropped via a Huey into enemy territory and destroy any insurgents and leave. This was more effective than fighting a losing ground war and meant the Viet Cong casualties increased. America may have lost the Vietnam War at home, but from a military standpoint, the casualties heavily favoured them. There is a similar approach from the COG, where they would be dropped into the surrounding areas of Jacinto to destroy Locust targets. They would even be inserted and extracted via a helicopter. Small squads were a necessity due to the lower COG population and the risk of large casualties at the hands of the Locust. Small squads like Delta and Alpha were useful for performing missions without risking massive loss of life. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this slightly different take. Tune in for part 2 where we look at the change in tone and inspiration for the sequel saga, so subscribe for that. Thanks again for watching.